What's up, everyone on YouTube? Just going to let the room populate here for just a second, and then we'll get rolling. Talk about yet another classic finish in this insane Knicks-Sixers game. What's that noise, Danny?
I'm not hearing a noise right now.
Yeah, I think so. This is the behind the scenes of podcasting. So maybe like a mouse scrolling, a chair creaking.
I mean, I scrolled a mouse once, but I'm not touching anything right now.
Oh, I don't hear it now.
Okay, well then I don't know what we're gonna do about it then.
All right. Well, if I hear it again, I'll annoyingly interrupt the show again.
Okay.
All right. Let's get started here on the pod. Wait, what was that right there?
I think that was me clicking a mouse.
Can you scroll your wheel for a second?
I just did.
Okay. I don't hear anything. What is that? That's so odd.
I don't know.
The beauty of live audio and podcasting. All right, fuck it. Let's start. We don't care about the audio quality anyway. Let's go. Sorry, I'm in trouble with my audio software. Let's try again. All right, there we go. This so many times that you just think that you're live and you're fine and nothing works, and then you just close it and try again and it just works. You didn't change anything. All right, welcome on to another awesome edition of Dunked on Prime, because we get to talk about this amazingly awesome series, and it ended up being, in the end, Knicks +1 over the 6 games. I foolishly thought, well, hey, maybe they're going to win it more easily than expected. It looked like maybe they would do that a couple of times throughout the evening. But I think the way I want to talk about this one before we get to the end of the game is just kind of go through it in chronological order, because the Knicks jumped all over the Sixers early, and you felt like maybe this was going to be a complete destruction and the magic of Tyrese Maxey in Game 5 would soon be forgotten.
This series has been pretty closely contested the whole way through. The largest lead that anyone had through 5 games of the series was, I believe, a 13-point lead. It might have been 15 earlier, and that was in Game 3. And the New York Knicks were just drilling their jump shots early. They were taking advantage of a deep drop for Joel Embiid, and it wasn't just Jalen Brunson. In fact, the biggest victimizer for the Knicks was Dante DiVincenzo, who has been marginalized in the expense of Miles McBride overall in this series. He drilled 3 huge first quarter threes. The Knicks were they were getting jumpers, and they led by 22 in the first quarter.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable because the Sixers just couldn't score at all, and they really seemed to struggle getting adjusted to what the new strategy was from New York, and they maintained it throughout the game, where Miles McBride had been the main guy on Maxey, and so Maxey was really able to get going because they felt like they had to put their center on Joel to guard him in the post, but then Joel can also play that handoff pick and roll game with Maxey. So I mean, you saw it obviously on those 2 iconic shots that Maxey hit at the end of the fourth quarter of Game 5, where Mitchell Robinson out in space, letting him get going towards him from way out on the floor. They didn't have an answer for that. So what they decided to start doing was actually putting 2 on the ball on Maxey, leaving Joel Embiid open, and then bringing a third guy in. And to facilitate that, what they decided to do in their starting group was actually to put DiVincenzo on Maxey. Not as good of an individual defender as Miles McBride, but I think the thinking was, well, hey, if we're going to put two on the ball anyway, it doesn't matter if we have the superior individual defender. They had tried to kind of shut off Maxey's water by just putting McBride on him, and he did yeoman's work, but it wasn't really possible to do that when your center also has to be glued to Joel at the same time. So then that put OG Anunoby, rather than starting the game on Maxey, on the back line. And he either was going to meet Embiid or he could meet other drivers. And I thought he had some really great defensive moments protecting the rim. A really awesome game overall as a help defender. Mixed game as an offensive player. But they deployed OG really as more of a four-man for the first time in the series, defensively, actually making plays around the basket. And it looked like Philly was a little flummoxed by that early, particularly Maxey, who really struggled until the very end.
There were a number of times where I thought it was a little bit of overkill. Maxey was fabulous throughout game 5, but especially at the end, because it was conceding some shots. Now, to be abundantly clear, Philadelphia was not hitting those shots early, but they were conceding it. And one of the interesting things when you go through the shot charts, because of what ended up happening in the second quarter, was Philadelphia was not generating corner threes in that first quarter. They just got 2, but relatively speaking, it was 7 above the break. They got some stuff around the basket and everything else. So I thought part of the story of the first quarter was the drop coverage and the Knicks hitting shots, but they were hitting jump shots, and then the Sixers missing basically everything. And so that allowed the Knicks to go out to that lead. The one thing that ended up being a huge part of the early part of the game was shifted was the Knicks went 1 for 10 on their first 10 shots in the restricted area. That was completely ridiculous.
And a big part of that, of course, was Embiid again. And I thought the Knicks even could have explored more of DiVincenzo working off the dribble or coming off of screens, because Joel was not going to leave the lane on anyone except for Brunson. From Philly's standpoint, they tried a number of different things against Brunson throughout the game. What they started with was actually going under on him a little bit more, hoping to challenge his three-pointer off the dribble on the other side. And Brunson will take the three, but that's still not the number one thing that he wants to do. He wants to get into the mid-range, use his stop and start game. And what that enabled them to do by going under was that Joel could be closer to the level of the ball, but not get blown by. The previous times in the series that they had gotten Joel further out on the floor, they tried to go over the screen, but then the guy would still get screened off enough that Brunson had Joel in space and he'd blow right by him. So this is a way to basically kind of have both guys there containing, but not, and they're willing to give up that three on occasion, but to not let Brunson get a free run. And they largely shut that off, with the exception of a couple of plays where they got just like some little quick hands on the side when Embiid was out of position or he wasn't involved in the action. So that was their approach against Brunson. It didn't work all that well. Brunson was still unbelievable again in this game. Ended up with 41 points, 13 of 27, but 12 of 16 from the foul line, and also had 12 assists, again, with just everything running through him. And he has had 3 games of 35 points and 10 assists in the series. Only other person to ever do that in a series is Oscar Robertson. Excuse me.
That's truly incredible. And Brunson's first quarter, it was only 3 of 8 from the field, but it was augmented by a 3-shot foul, which kind of ended up was kind of a culmination there in that first quarter. And so it's looking really bad for Philly. And in some ways, I mean, that they cut the lead to, I think it was 14 at the end of the first quarter. You could argue in some ways was a small victory for them, considering
without Embiid on the floor in that last like 3 minutes, right?
He went to the locker room briefly, and so they went, and the Paul Reed minutes in that stretch went reasonably well. And so then, looking for answers, Nick Nurse goes to a 30-something who has played less in the series than I expected. But no, it's not Nicola Batum, who did play 27 minutes in this game. It was the unearthing, the exhuming of one Buddy Hield, who completely transformed Game 6 in the second quarter.
He did, and it was in part because they started double teaming Joel Embiid, and particularly against Isaiah Hartenstein, who got 2 fouls in the first. Like Embiid was keeping him in it by getting the foul line early. He scored the first 9 points for the Sixers, in part at Hartenstein's expense with some kind of cheapo fouls. So then they started double teaming Embiid in the post, and he carved that up pretty well. It wasn't exactly, the most disguised double teams in the world. They're just coming before he put it on the ground, but they also like weren't trying to front in the post at all, which it was very basic. And I thought Philly's offense in the second and third quarter looked pretty amazing most of the way through because they're able to generate easy double teams, whether it was on Maxey out top or more often Embiid. And Nick Nurse, I don't know if he went to Hield specifically because they were double teaming. He wanted him on the weak side as a target, but he surely added a shooting element that the likes of Batum or Oubre, those are guys who will take it if they're wide open, whereas Hield is hunting that shot. And so he really did that in the second quarter, ends up with 17 points in the quarter, 5 threes, and also had a drive off the 3-point line where he got to the foul line. And then the thing they started doing late in that half, a half which saw them trail by over 20 and lead at halftime, which had never happened in the play-by-play era since 1997 in the postseason, was with Brunson on him, they started actually involving Brunson more in screening action up top and in three-man screening actions up top, where Hield is an expert at that Spain pick and roll type game and also at ghosting out of screens. He did a ton of that in Indiana, and that was working really well as they surged back into the lead.
It just showed it had more flow to their offense, and it was notable that Joel Embiid was making better passes during that stretch than he was. In part, he was tired at the end of Game 5, but like he was throwing the ball all over the gym at the end of Game 5. He had one bad one at the beginning of Game 6 as well. But I think he weirdly found a passing rhythm because of the consistency of the coverage.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then they started changing up a little bit. On occasion, they would just not double at all. But when he had Hartenstein, he was able to just get to that left shoulder jump hook. It was great to see him put him in the goal. Joel even had a couple of plays where he like ran the floor in transition and posted up, which is where he's completely unstoppable. One of them, they maddeningly did not find him on that because he's going to do that 3 times a game. You should probably look for him in that circumstance. And then other times they would try to double once he put the ball on the floor. And then finally, when Mitchell Robinson came in the third, I thought that actually really changed the game. When did he come in? Because it was 71-61. I think that's right about the time that he came in the third. And I thought that Embiid was just absolutely killing them out of those post-ups early in the third as well. And Robinson, he starts fronting him in the post, draws an offensive foul there. Joel would foul out in the end. And just Robinson is strong enough and fought hard enough that Embiid couldn't just put him in the goal the way Hartenstein could, and that enabled them to stay a little bit more solid on those post-ups or prevent the ball from being entered regardless.
Robinson checked in when Embiid was in the process of making the free throws that pushed the lead to 77-70 in favor of Philadelphia. And then it got cut from a 7-point lead to a tie at the end of the third quarter. So yeah, Robinson and
they didn't really score much after that either, right?
No, they did not. They had a Batum 3 and a campaign 3. I believe that's all they had during that stretch.
Yeah, and Payne was solid again, by the way. Like he just gave him like a little more energy and aggression in the half court, which I felt that they needed. What did you make of the fact that Hield did not see the floor in the third quarter?
I didn't love it in particular because the Knicks weren't really deviating from their strategy. So if they're going to that, then Hield makes a lot of sense out there on the floor. And as has been the case throughout this first round, it's this also the lack of suitability of a replacement. So Tobias Harris was out there, and Tobias Harris wasn't abysmal in this game. He also only took 2 shots in 29 minutes. And it's not like he's a stout defender, like you're sacrificing that much defensively going from Harris to Hield. So when Embiid and Maxey were on the floor together, in particular, when that doubling strategy was going on, I didn't see the logic of that because Harris and Lowry weren't really benefiting in the same way. And Oubre, he got some shots during that time, but Hield is just so good at doing that. And incredibly, despite his lack of, overall time with the Philadelphia 76ers, it seemed like Embiid, Maxey, and everyone knew where Hield was going to be, and they were making those reads seamlessly.
Yeah, the one he had in transition in the fourth quarter where he was covered, it was a 2-on-2, they don't throw it to him, and so he just gets, I think it was Anunoby, to turn his head and just runs all the way to the strong side corner for a three. That was a brilliant cut for him. I actually thought he held up reasonably well on defense. He had
Agreed.
an amazing offensive rebound in the fourth. Like, he's actually a good rebounding guard. That's one reason I thought maybe they should have explored using him more to some degree. But it did seem like the theory of him was good enough that I didn't feel he should have been excised as soon as he was. Remember, he actually played pretty well in that Miami game too, with some drives that were really important. So yeah, fourth quarter, Knicks continue to storm back. I thought one of the biggest plays of the game, they take out Brunson and Miles McBride. Like, you're going to be feeding for a bucket without Brunson, and Miles McBride just gets a screen. They don't keep him on the side. They should have iced it. They don't. He comes off the screen middle. Joel's in a dead drop, late in the clock. And I realize the scheme may not be for Joel to leave the paint, but it's just like Miles McBride's not going to blow by you for a layup. So to just get out there and don't yeah, okay, maybe we're like, oh, McBride, we're not that worried about him making shots. Actually, he has made shots in this series, but they just give up a wide open three on that play, which was really disappointing to me because you're kind of letting your foot off the gas defensively in a series where every single moment, particularly the other team's star is off the floor, is so critical.
Particularly in a late clock situation where the downside risk of coming up is a lot lower because it takes time to get to the basket. They weren't going to get anything necessarily great there because I believe the McBride shot was like 1 or 2 seconds left on the shot clock. It was low, whether it was 1 or 2 or not, and so that was a temporary lifeline. The Knicks offense in those Brunson minutes wasn't fantastic, but that's why getting those is very important. Brunson checked back in. It was Tibbs called his timeout like after the next Sixers possession, and then brought Brunson back in the game. And then he immediately I think he made 2 3-pointers like on the next 2 possessions.
Yeah, that was pretty massive. And they had a couple of like 6-0 Jags like that in 2 possessions. One of them that ate up all the lead in the third, and then Brunson getting those threes in the fourth. He just he's just so good. He just constantly keeps pressure on when he has the ball. You can never relax because that's when he's going to beat you. And Batum got him at the end of game 5. He got Batum on a play where Batum was trying to get back into the play. Joel just started retreating, and he was able to find a little gap there to squeeze off a three from the left wing. And then the Sixers start really struggling on the offensive end. I thought that the big thing in that fourth quarter was going to be, all right, who can avoid the bullshit fouls on the other team's superstar? As it turned out, neither team really did much of that. The one foul that did take place, Brunson missed the free throw on that 3-point play late. I
Well,
did
and
think
then
one thing.
well,
Yeah,
then
go ahead.
the other foul that happened around this period was the weird, super bizarre play where Isaiah Hartenstein gets hit in the face and they call a foul on Joel Embiid and the Sixers challenge it. However, it is true that what hit him in the face and caused him to have a bloody nose was the basketball. However, Joel Embiid also hit him in the face. And so it was an unsuccessful challenge for the Raptors. They were then for the Raptors. I keep on saying that with with the Sixers, and they lose a timeout, which ended up, they still had some discretionary ones to work with, but not having a challenge and losing a timeout on a play like that was tough.
Yeah, it was. And it was one of those ones where I think it was adjudicated the way it kind of should be. I don't really understand what the standard is anymore. And with the NBA kind of having changed the rules halfway through the season, maybe the referees don't either. Because that's one of the
It's possible.
okay, so here's an example of that, right? If the D'Angelo Russell overturn was not a foul, right? Where he blocks it and then follows through and hits him in the face after, if that was deemed marginal contact and was overturned, like that was a foul live and was overturned on a challenge. this was kind of the same thing, right? Like he makes contact with the ball first, and then in more of the same motion, but still makes contact with the head of Hartenstein. So yeah, I would think any of those would be enough to overturn it if you're giving deference to the original call. But it's also like, maybe that didn't really affect things too much or whatever. But the call is sustained. But the problem with it wasn't the original call. It was the whether the call is right or wrong. It was gonna just prevent a non-shooting foul. Like what was the point of challenging right there? I guess I don't recall there being another specific play that they should have challenged that I thought they would have won in the end, but it still was a little bit of an odd call to me. And hey, they could have used the extra timeout too. I think maybe that was an automatic. They would have lost anyway. I can't recall exactly, but
And on the ensuing play, Brunson did score. So you also you don't know what would have happened. It would have been different. But yeah, and then that was actually right as the Knicks started pushing out the lead again, and they lead. I believe it got up to 8 with about 3.5 to go. But of course, this is Knicks Sixers, where no lead is ever remotely safe.
yeah, Knicks had gone up 6 with those 2 Brunson threes in a row. It had been tied at 95 with just under 7 minutes to go. And yeah, then the Knicks are up under 3 minutes to go, 109-101, after Anunoby was wide open, decided not to take a three, and just came in and smashed it on Embiid's head. Then they go to
though he did miss the ensuing free throw.
Yes, he did miss the ensuing free throw, which was a big problem, missing free throws on 3-point plays. And then they run the Maxey Joel pick and roll. He gets it at the foul line. He really did not want to take that pick and pop three. He hit a couple of big threes in the third early, but did not seem to want to take the jumper. But for a guy who didn't have a lot of energy, I wondered why he didn't. But he's able to drive. He kind of gets tripped by Anunoby playing defense on the back line. Hits a couple of free throws. And Joel, his line in the end, 13 of 13 from the foul line, 12 of 25 from the field. He did 5 offensive rebounds, 6 turnovers, and had 39 points, more than double the. Oh no, excuse me, Hield had 20. Got to scroll a little further down on the old box score. I was going to say it was more than double what any other Sixer had. I mean, they had relatively balanced scoring in the end, with 16 from Batum, 20 from Hield, 17 from Maxey, 17 from Oubre. But Tobias Harris had only taken 1 shot until basically the last couple of minutes, and he only ended up playing 29 minutes. Hield got a bunch of his minutes, and then Lowry only played 13 minutes. He failed to score too. So they had 2 starters who completely failed to score. Knicks come back, and at this point, they change things up. First possession, they put Joel on Josh Hart. So they set the screen with Josh Hart, and Brunson still gets close to the basket, but misses a tough floater. And Maxey pushes it all the way down. I termed it on the show a terrible decision, but an unbelievable shot, just laying it up among 3 guys.
Yeah, it was incredibly ambitious.
Then they go to straight up double teaming Brunson with Oubre and Batum, trying to get him off the ball. Hart passes up a wide open 3, misses a layup, has the tip. He tips it over the rim.
And on this, just a brief thing, I didn't think he had control of the tip. I think he should have just tried, because he tried to do like a one-handed tip in. If he had just grabbed that, it would have run more time. But that isn't what happened.
Then they go to the Embiid short roll again. Anunoby steps up. Embiid doesn't really make a great pass. He throws it to Harris, who's covered. Harris shoots the shot that he's shot all of his life, except for the last 40 games of the season, with just the tough 2, decent look. But Oubre flies in from the right wing and bangs it down. Brunson was his man, but Brunson had to box out another big. Nobody saw Oubre come in. And now the Sixers had a ton of momentum. They are only down one with 111 remaining. They've gone on a 7-0 run all of a sudden.
But then a really rough, this is the one that was a really rough call, where it thankfully it didn't result in free throws because the Knicks weren't in the bonus. But basically, Brunson runs into Kelly Oubre and they call a foul on Oubre. And Nurse is belligerent. We were belligerent on the broadcast. But thankfully, that one it wasn't that sort of a it didn't have
Well,
that
it
kind of
wasn't in the
consequence.
bonus, so
Exactly.
it didn't end up mattering because the next foul ended up being a shooting foul. And on that one, Brunson gets the ball back after they got out of his hands initially, and they just sort of like Oubre just gave him an avenue to drive hard to his left hand. He gets in front of Oubre, pulls up at the line. He got this foul a couple of times. That is a foul when you can get your whole body in front of the guy and he runs into your back, unless you specifically jump backwards, which he didn't. He just slowed down and he gets off the ground quickly. He's got those sudden burst movements and he's able to make it. Gets hit in the back by Oubre, obvious foul call, and looks like he's going to put the Knicks up 4 again. Philly's not going to end up with a chance to tie, but he misses that shot. Philly comes down again, 2 on the ball, pick and roll with Embiid. They throw it to him. He wants to just hand back to Maxey. Knicks defend it really well. It's just DiVincenzo on Maxey. I actually thought DiVincenzo or Maxey should have done more of this on DiVincenzo. It just trying to blow by him. Like, I don't think DiVincenzo is an amazing
Doesn't need a
individual
screen.
defender, but he does it this time, gets right to the corner of the backboard. Hartenstein makes an amazing play to come off of Embiid and actually get there. I thought live it was a good block. They call it a goaltend so they can review it and say that it is a goaltend. If it was by an infinitesimal margin.
It is the closest goaltend, non-goaltend I have ever seen in my lifetime of watching basketball. And we had plenty of angles. I could not be sure what happened.
There's no way you can't have a goaltend that actually is a goaltend be closer on that sort of a play with the, like, I've struggled before on the ones that are in the air. Is it coming down? But on those, does it hit the backboard first plays? Yeah, I mean, there's like the slightest bit of daylight between the ball. You can see it start to move backwards slightly before his hand contacts it, but Maxey gets fouled and 1 on the goaltend. If you don't have that rule that you can call a goaltend and then review it, I'm guessing they don't call it a goaltend. They had to like really talk about it. The other thing too is that there was a foul called already, so they can kind of like get together. Okay, what do we have here? What do we have here? Whereas if there's no foul, I don't think they call it a goaltend either. But we have kind of complained about this where they just auto call it as a goaltend and review it. This one was close enough, though. I understand why they did that. There's a few of them that are so obviously not a goaltend that they call it a goaltend just to review it and be safe. This time, though, I think they made the right decision, and I don't know how much deference you're supposed to give again to the call on the floor,
Especially
but
when
with
the
it,
call
yeah,
on the floor might have been a placeholder.
exactly. I totally agree with you. Yeah. So tie game, 111 each, sticks all around. 34 seconds left. Knicks call timeout to advance the ball, and you would have liked for them to go to the 2-for-1 there. It's tough in terms of the timing. They had 2 timeouts remaining. Tom Thibodeau actually had like his full complement of timeouts, even had to use it or lose it. That was just pretty much discretionary that he used.
Yeah, that's why we ended up with back-to-back timeouts in the fourth quarter because both they just like, fine, we'll just use it. It was so weird.
Which I didn't think was a good idea. Again, I thought
No,
the Knicks had the fatigue advantage, even though Tom Thibodeau, until the very end of the game, situationally, made 2 substitutions. Mitchell Robinson for Isaiah Hartenstein
in the
and
second
Isaiah
half.
Hartenstein for Mitchell Robinson. Yeah, the second half. That's what I meant to say if I didn't. So, and you wondered what they were going to do at this point. You figured they were probably going to double team Brunson. That's what they did. They give it to Josh Hart. They're doubling off of Hart again. And Hart, pretty good decision. He goes back to Brunson. Brunson actually kind of gets out of the trap, which was key of Oubre. He couldn't keep him in there. He's still on the ball. So he's able to drive. Joel steps up. It's still he doesn't really have any kind of an opening. But Oubre, once Brunson goes around him, he kind of goes out of bounds. He kind of jogs back into the play. Like he didn't like sprint back into the action. And as it turned out, Hart is open up top. Brunson finds him. He makes a brilliant pass fake. And Maxey made the right thing. He's coming off of DiVincenzo. Clearly, you're like, okay, we want Josh Hart to shoot the ball. We don't want DiVincenzo to shoot the ball. So Hart, pass fake, sends Maxey flying off that stunt. And Oubre, who realizes too late that he is the guy who needs to get back to Hart, couldn't do it. And Hart hits an unbelievably huge three to put the Knicks up by 3.
One of Josh Hart's 3 made 3-pointers in the game. 16 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists for Hart in this one, plus 7 in. Oh yeah, 46 minutes of action.
Thibodeau was asked
Wait,
after
actually,
the game, yes.
No, go ahead. Do that, and then I'll say the minute totals.
Yeah. He was asked about his Josh Hart's minutes, and he's like, "Did you consider taking him out in the second half?" He's like, "I considered it, but it was a passing thought."
Okay, so here are the minute totals for the 4 principals for the Knicks in this game.
Jesus Christ.
The lowest of them was Jalen Brunson at 43-36. Then OG Anunoby 45-15. Josh Hart 46-29. And then I think we lost this in the moment because it hadn't been him in the series. Dante DiVincenzo, the full 48.
Surprising, yeah. He'd been the guy who'd been kind of 27. McBride had been getting more minutes than him. And I thought that Philly, I'm not sure I loved the strategy of putting the 2 on the ball on Maxey. I mean, Philly scored overall much better in this game. Part of that was the Knicks were 14 of 31 from 3, but Philly was 17 of 40. So both teams shot exceedingly well from downtown, over 40%. But Philly was just getting a lot more open looks than they had. And of course, playing an offensive player like Hield certainly helped with that when he's going to go and make 6 threes. So I'm not sure if it was the right decision to kind of go to a different strategy on Maxey in particular. If they did hold down Maxey, I don't know if they did that overall for the Philly offense. And they also, I think, didn't, I just don't like giving up 2 on the ball if you don't absolutely have to. Their overall defense had been pretty good. They held them to 97 points in regulation in the last game, even if Maxey did go crazy. But maybe they felt like they just wanted to do something different and get DiVincenzo's offense off there a little bit more. I thought Philly really kind of blew it by not going after Brunson. They really just didn't do that at all. They didn't go to those double screening actions. They didn't try to involve Hield in some of the actions either and do more ghost screening and that kind of stuff. If he was going to be out there, I think he only took 1 shot in the second half until the very end, which we'll get to. And here, Philly goes for the quick 2. And I thought while they got a very easy one, it was a quick enough, easy enough 2, Anunoby just gets out of the way. It was also noteworthy, by the way, that Thibodeau learned from his experience last time and went small so they could switch and be more mobile and not give up threes. So they get a quick post up for Joel against Anunoby. He goes right in for just an easy layup. Anunoby backs off of him to give up the 2, which I think was good. You could easily, Joel's going to be body hunting there. But I felt that they erred in not trying for the 3 because particularly you knew they were going to be very attuned to fouling to not give up a 3-pointer after what happened in the last game. And in the end, they never really got a decent enough shot on goal. And also, of course, the Knicks hit their free throws.
For sure. And Philly used their last timeout. They only had 1 remaining with that after the Josh Hart 3. So you knew this whole time. And so you and I started the conversation when there were 24 seconds left of okay, how far would it have to be to foul? And also I thought that the Knicks did a good job. Once Embiid made that shot, they had a plan. They got the ball in. Jalen Brunson was able to kind of get out of a version of a trap. And then another failure by the Sixers in this late game stretch was it ended up being at one point that Josh Hart had the ball. They're kind of moving the ball around, running a little bit of time. There was a little bit of a dicey pass there to, I think that was from DiVincenzo to Hart. It was a little bit aggressive, but Hart was able to get it. And then Oubre had an opportunity to foul, and he didn't. And there were two problems with that. One is Josh Hart is the guy that you want to foul. And two, that left the person who got the ball as Dante DiVincenzo, and the person closest to him was Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid that was his sixth foul, so he's out of the game.
Yeah, as it turned out, it didn't matter that much, although being able to throw it into Joel and have him jack up a three might have been nice at the end. So, DiVincenzo, 2 free throws. Sixers, when did they use their last time out? I think they used it. Did they use it after the Brunson or the Hart 3? I think they did, right? I felt, they did.
The Sixers did, yes.
Yeah, so I felt, again, the other way they erred was they probably should have tried to push that up and see if you can get a 3 right back. And then if nothing's going, you could have taken the timeout. But so they have these 2 situations where they have no timeouts. McBride is in, he's on Maxey. I thought the Knicks did a really nice job of making sure that with pressure that they had to come back to the ball. And that made it a lot easier to foul. The first time they fouled Maxey way back there with like 10 seconds left, McBride, he had said after the previous game, like, I should have been up on him more and I should have taken the foul earlier. That's what he did. And Maxey hits a couple of free throws. You're not in intentional miss territory yet. I mean, that's maybe a little early to foul. You'd like to maybe run off a bit more time, but Maxey is so fast. Like McBride was like, look, I'm not going to let him get this shot off. Knicks make a couple more free throws. They don't really get a great trap on Brunson, and they didn't have any timeouts. So that's a foul with just under 8 seconds left. Try to get in again to Maxey, and he tries to throw the pass up the sideline. That gets knocked away. So at 3.7 left, Philly is inbounding. They don't have a timeout. Again, they have to just kind of come up with a play. Hield is in the game. And they actually get a pretty decent pass to him in a spot, but I thought it was great defense by the Knicks. Hield with 3.7, he's expecting an immediate foul. So he just goes to like turn and jack it up on an impossible shot to try to draw a 3-shot foul. And the Knicks just backed off. Shot hits the backboard, and that was it. So it was as bad as the Knicks execution was in game 5. Surely Tom Thibodeau was like, yeah, if we're in this situation again, here's what we're going to do. And he made sure everyone was on the same page, and they did a great job of executing, and they also had the right personnel in there.
Having the personnel is extremely important. Also, you don't necessarily want to get those lessons through the scars that the Knicks have from it, but it ended up working out for them. They end up closing out the series, and they move on. They move on to the next round. And I mean, an incredible performance overall from Jalen Brunson. High leverage, high volume, but high success after a really challenging start to the series. He responded extremely well. I think it's worth taking a beat to appreciate kind of where this series went from him. So game 1, Brunson, 8 of 26 from the field in a win. Game 2, 8 of 29 from the field in a win. But then 39, 47, 40, 41 with double-digit assists in 3 of those 4 contests.
So Philly will have another long summer to think about this. They have all kinds of cap space, which is going to be fascinating which direction they go. They got the small cap hold of Maxey. They got some assets to trade for guys. And who knows where all that's going to end up. We'll have to talk about that in greater detail. But do you have any feelings, takeaways while this series is fresh in our mind of just what to make of this team, these players, what they need, anything along those lines?
I'm happy that we did get some big Joel Embiid performances in this series. And it might not have been the top to bottom dominance that we've always wanted to see from him. We know Embiid was coming back from injury. He did average, just to be complete about it, 33 points, 11 rebounds, 5.7 assists in these games, averaged 41.6 minutes per game as well, which is pretty striking. And so I the idea that he can do it. And I mean, this series had more rewards for BS foul drawing than I would have enjoyed. He had a stretch, I think that was in the second quarter, might have been the first, where it was just a bunch of nonsense. But it does get called a fair amount. And he at times was an extremely dominant interior defender. That 1 of 10 from the Knicks in the restricted area at the beginning of the game was very well earned and largely earned by Joel Embiid. So it sucks that they're getting knocked out in round one for that and for the legacy stuff and everything else. And I do believe in the Maxey and Embiid pairing, but I will believe in it a lot more if they can add a third player who is at least in the plausible, like commensurate talent level. Like if they can add a third player who's meaningfully better than the ones they have now, which is of course the whole theory of this cap space.
Yeah, and of course, Joel was not 100%. Is he ever? Tough to say. I mean, he made up for that by actually making jumpers for the first time in his playoff career this year. That was important. I think that's going to have to be a big part of his recipe going forward. But clearly, his drive game was a lot more limited. I think he still showed what a defensive presence he can be, but this was largely a pretty decent matchup for him in a lot of respects. The Knicks were always going to play a center. They weren't going to do anything too creative. When they did, interestingly enough, which they never went back to again, I thought they should have, with Anunoby guarding him and Achua also in there. They never really went to guys who were going to be aggressive and front him or anything like that. And he was always going to be okay playing a drop coverage because the Knicks always had a center on the floor. And Brunson will stress out those drop coverages, but not in a way where Embiid's going to have to cover ground and really get into space as much. I thought they came up with a lot of good strategies on Brunson, but Brunson, kind of got his. He gets his against most teams, and because he's just going to keep shooting, and there's only so much you can do about that. If they had advanced to say a Boston series, I think that he would have really struggled on both ends in his current state. And he had some moments where he really struggled in this series too. So certainly getting another offensive option would be nice. Getting more athleticism on the wing would be nice as well. Getting a little bit more shooting would be nice. I mean, Harris ended up just being such an albatross for them where he was like just sort of a cipher on either end. Like he wouldn't be killing you, but then you'd realize he kind of wasn't really doing anything either most of this series. So I'm interested to see what Daryl Morey is going to come up with in terms of the cap space. But Joel, credit to him for gutting it out. I still thought he maybe could have come into these playoffs a little bit more trimmed to maybe make up for the fact that he's injured. He still had the knee brace on. Is he going to have to wear that knee brace the whole rest of his career? It clearly bothered him. I think Maxey can get a lot better. Like he's got to figure out, improve as a passer still, which he's done every year. And also maybe as an individual shot creator. So, but that two-man game is pretty good. But I also think that in a lot of ways, this actually, it's not incredible. I was impressed by the Knicks' toughness, but they also were missing the only other guy who can create offense for them, and Randall, who I actually think would have had a pretty good series in this series if he'd been available.
Mm-hmm.
So, although I felt that before against the Hawks, it wasn't really the case. I didn't think he had an easy matchup last year. So the Knicks will move on. They'll play the Pacers, and let's start and discuss this one. Damian Lillard was able to come back. He clearly would not have played if this were a regular season game. He looked pretty limited. Giannis was not able to get there. It seemed like maybe had they gotten to a game 7, it could have happened. But in the end, the Pacers took care of business in rather easy fashion.
It was a very good response from the Pacers after the desultory loss that they had in game 5. And there are a lot of different people worthy of praise, but the one that was the most stunning to me in the moment was TJ McConnell, where TJ McConnell, who, this operating idea, and I still think this is true a vast majority of the time, that these non-shooting point guards can be a big liability in the postseason, but he was a huge swing factor in game 6, 20 points, 9 assists, and also only 1 turnover, plus 22 in 23 minutes of action. And there were points where it seemed like maybe the Bucks could get a little bit there, and then the door just kept on getting pushed further and further away.
Yeah, it was just Patrick Beverly, Bobby Portis, like these guys couldn't sustain their effort when the defense was really loaded to them. And for Lillard's standpoint, you have to give it a go in that circumstance if you can be out there. And thankfully, he didn't suffer another injury. It really was, it seemed like touch and go up until today of whether he was going to play. And he'd been dealing with this Achilles for a while. But once the Pacers were able to not foul him, you could tell. I mean, he'll usually try to hunt calls anyway, but you could tell he was limited because that was kind of like all he was doing in
Right.
sections of the game. And then their defense, which really caused problems for the Pacers in game 5, I think it was somewhat compromised by him as well. I don't think he was like actively terrible screwing up, but he also didn't add anything in the way some of the other guys might have. And they should have just tried to use it more as a decoy to get 2 on the ball and just try to play out of that a little bit more than they did. And then on the other side, I was concerned about the Pacers because Tyrese Halliburton didn't look right, and McConnell was the guy for them in the second half. But in the first half, it was Halliburton, and not only was he aggressive from 3, but he wasn't running with his back like ramrod straight,
Sure.
dealing with the backs. You could just see that, like, oh yeah, he's actually able to like slightly lean forward as he's running like a normal person, and that was he clearly got some treatment, was feeling better. In this game, he was pushing the ball up, getting into transition, and then also just running more pick and roll, getting into the lane more. And I think he had 15 or 16 in the first half. So that was really important. He didn't hit his 3 as well, but the level of aggression from him is the most that we've seen really in this series. Siakam was able to get into it at least a little bit more than he had as well. And I think it was just emblematic of how limited this Bucks group was, that McConnell, who is a better player than when he was minimized in playoffs past for this Pacers team or even for the Sixers before that, the fact that he was able to just absolutely kill them just showed how limited this Bucks team was in the end.
One of the most striking stats this game for me, I'll get there in a couple ways, is that Indiana put up a 132 offensive rating in game 6, and they did so without dominant three-point shooting. They were 13 of 40. And how they did that was they were 33 of 45 on twos in this game. That's 73% inside the arc. They were 20 of 23 in the restricted area. They were 30 of 39 in the paint in total, which the attempts and of course the ludicrous percentage on that. And some of that was, guys having really good nights getting it. And some of it was also just like they would beat a coverage and they would have an open pass or something else. And so the Bucks just didn't have the personnel. I would say it was more personnel than execution to stop the Pacers inside the arc, and honestly outside the arc, they were getting pretty good looks.
Yeah, if the Bucks had made a few more shots, this could have been a more competitive game. But when they're missing, the Pacers were able to get their running game going. I thought the game actually really changed in the first quarter when Toppin came in and was able to get out in transition. He was ultra aggressive. Another guy who you're just like, if you can't figure out a way to take advantage of Obi Toppin, then you're not that good in the end. And this Bucks team wasn't. Middleton, he gave yeoman's work again. He gave all, like, I think the Bucks, like, they played really hard in this game. They just didn't have enough. And outside of the big 3, it's a shame that they couldn't have gotten Giannis and Lillard and this version of Middleton ever healthy at the same time, because I think that actually would have been pretty interesting.
Sure.
And if you looked back at the numbers when those 3 guys were on the floor, they had a double-digit net rating, but it was really not to be. And part of the problem too is they just didn't have enough throughout the regular season. Lillard, Giannis, these guys just got really worn down, in part because Middleton wasn't available for so long as well to take the pressure off them. And so, they tried to rest guys some. There was more of an emphasis on everyone playing as well. But, this is not the Giannis Antetokounmpo who was able to get away with playing, 31 minutes a game back in the early Bud era, for example. And so now the Bucks, they go into a difficult off season as well. Anything else you want to say on this game in particular?
I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on it. We'll see what the adjudication of the Patrick Beverly fan interaction at the end is.
Oh,
Um,
dude, can I uh take credit for my best tweet ever, which was, now all that remains is to see how Patrick Beverly or Bobby Portis are going to get themselves thrown out. And yes, Beverly didn't get himself thrown out because I think the league didn't see that, but yeah, he just like threw a ball like really hard at a fan. And of course, Beverly, he got himself, whenever his team gets eliminated, it doesn't go too well. He got himself, thrown out after his interaction with Chris Paul, where he just shoved him in the back in Game 6 back in 2021. He was with the Clippers, so he definitely brings an element. But you're also like, hey, like Patrick Beverly is probably someone you should have been relying on for if you're going to be a real team like 3 years ago, and he gave them a couple of decent games in the series. That's all you could realistically ask for. They just didn't have anyone on the perimeter who could guard anyone or had any athleticism. Blake Beasley also had a great game in Game 5. He turned into a pumpkin. He was getting roasted defensively with like back cuts and guys blowing right by him. Like, he wasn't ready for the little McConnell step up screen along the sideline and just gets blown by for a layup. Just stupid shit where it's like, hey, it's Game 6 of the series. You should probably be ready for this at this point. This is like the number one way that TJ McConnell scores. The
well,
Pacers
and
pressure also, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
The Pacers pressure also really told. They'd been doing it throughout the series, but they didn't want to stress out Dame or Middleton by making it bring the ball up against that pressure. And so, particularly through McConnell, they got multiple pick six turnovers against the likes of Connaughton trying to bring the ball up. So they ramped that up even further, just not necessarily strategy wise, but just in terms of the intensity, and got a bunch of turnovers that way, which were really demoralizing for Milwaukee.
And so I think for me, the biggest thing that I'm feeling at the end of the series is sadness, not that the Bucks deserve to win, but that we as fans as didn't get to see this team. And you and I were so excited when the Damian Lillard trade happened, and this was one of their only bites at the apple. And just to have it out there, basketball reference ages for their principal players this year: Lillard 33, Giannis 29, Lopez 35, Chris Middleton 32 with knees that are probably older than that. And so we don't know how many more opportunities this group of players are going to have together at a level that we think of as viable. The Warriors are instructive on this, numerous other teams as well. And so I hope we do, just because I love seeing great basketball, and this Bucks team certainly capable of it, even if this year wasn't what any of us wanted for a variety of reasons. And so now it's over. Congratulations, the Pacers, for advancing. We'll have an interesting series that we will preview, but the Bucks, we're not going to get to see them anymore.
Yeah, and so two things to talk about. The first of those is 2019. We'll go through the Giannis MVP level of player era. 2019, number 1 seed in the East, up 2-0 in the conference finals, lose to the Raptors. 2020, killing the whole league. Bubble happens, lose in the second round to Miami. Giannis sprains his ankle in game 4, but they're down 3-0 already. The series was lost. 2021, win the championship, albeit with massive injuries on both sides of the bracket. They were down 2-0 against the Nets, would have lost that series. But they did make it through. That season was just a ridiculous grind for everyone with all the COVID protocols and having to get
Well,
up early to get
and they had
tested and all
injuries
that.
too. I mean, Giannis got hurt
Yeah.
in those playoffs.
Yeah, he did, and he managed to come back. So it was maybe a different type of season, but they survived it. They won the championship. It's the first Bucks championship since 1971. 2022, they tank on the final day of the season to be the 3 seed. Don't have home court advantage against Boston. Chris Middleton gets hurt in game 2 against Chicago. Doesn't play at all against Boston. They lose in 7. They blew 2 one-game series leads in that series. But I don't think that they should have won that series with Middleton out necessarily, because that was They didn't have Dame there. It was Drew Holiday. 2023, number one seed, but a team that really outperformed its point differential. Giannis gets bridged by Kevin Love in game one, picks the charge, doesn't come back until game four, but they go 1-1 in his absence. He's probably not 100%, obviously, in games 4 and 5, and they blow massive leads in the fourth quarter of both of those games, end up losing the first round 4-1 to Miami, and then this year, of course, losing in the first round to Indiana. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you consider this Giannis MVP era an overachievement, an underachievement, a disappointment?
Appropriate level of achievement and also a disappointment, because when you have one of the best players in the world, you hope that you can get closer, especially in the years that they didn't. But they did win a championship. They deserved the championship they won, even if they could have lost in those playoffs. So, I would say below average EV for how good this team has been, but not horrendously so. I mean, they did win. How about you?
Yeah, I think, some would say that 2021 is the outlier. Of course, the injuries have been massive in the 3 years since winning the championship, but they also got, you would say, pretty good luck in 2021. Those are the breaks. I mean, it's been Giannis himself injured the last 2 years, in part. That's what's killed them. They make the trade for Dame. And they also, when you say, you look at where these guys are in 2019, and then you also note that they've traded away how many years of draft? It's basically as many picks as they could from 2021 onward to make the Drew trade. The Drew trade was a good trade. The Dame trade I was on board with, but they weren't able to bolster this group. Yeah, it does feel disappointing because they went into the East playoffs in most of these years as the favorites, and whether due to injury or underperformance, they weren't able to come through it.
And only made
2020, yeah,
and only made one finals too. It's not like they,
yeah.
got to the finals and lost to a game team, whether it was the Warriors or someone else. No, they only made the finals once.
And I do think they trying to put my words together here in the right way. Uh, yeah, it is a little bit disappointing to me in the end. And I mean, particularly that 2020 loss when it looked like they had the best team. And there are a lot of weird circumstances. It's been a weird time in the NBA for sure, with a lot of disappointments in a lot of places for teams that were supposed to be favored. I want to do a Watfo here before we finish up.
Okay.
We're doing this now. I haven't looked at any reporting or tweets, anything like that. There's been no time to consider it. What are the odds as we sit here on May 2nd, 2024, that one of Giannis or Dame Lillard is not a Buck when the 24-25 season tips off?
At the start of the coming season,
Yeah.
I almost never go this extreme. 3%.
Ooh. Wow. I guess the question becomes, well, what do you think of their prospects going forward? Like, is there any hope?
I think that they're especially when you lose when you're hurt. I think that they're like with injuries, there's that approach. But it's also, what is the pivot? Because they're not going to get, if they trade Damian Lillard, they're not getting near what they gave up for him. I don't think. Miami didn't have it in the first place. And what are you
No,
doing?
I think it happens because one of them doesn't want to be there anymore. That's why it happens.
It's possible. I think they're given. I think they're given another run. Maybe if next year goes badly during the year, you could see something. I don't expect it to. You can go higher. Maybe you'll be right.
Yeah, so they've got their number 24 pick this year. They can trade a 31 as well into the future. Don't really have anything else on the roster of note to trade. and salaries like Portis. Portis would probably be viewed as a positive contract. Pat Connaughton still has 2 years left after this one. He's really struggled. Jay Crowder didn't give him anything. There's going to be a lot of competition among these high salaried teams to try to get minimum contracts. I don't know if the Bucks are going to win that. I'm also concerned there's been a happy he's gone through a divorce. He said this is just a really difficult year for him personally. And so I think does one of those guys, maybe Giannis, just say, hey, it's not here. We can't do it. That's I'm gonna put it on. I'm gonna put it on a 20% chance that one of them is not on the team to start the 24-25 season. But I agree. I think that if they had been healthy and lost like this, chance is probably much higher. But I get the bigger issue is like how do they fix their problems? And particularly with they maybe just a full Doc Rivers training camp, all that. I thought Doc coached an okay series. The one thing that sticks out though is just the way he goes crazy about some of these calls, like waving his arms in the air with this crazy look of incredulity. It just doesn't impart much confidence in his team. I think it brings this feeling that the sky is falling and everyone's against us. It's totally out of our control. It's not really, I don't think that is something that galvanizes his team to fight back. I think it's more, like they show that lab rats, when like there's no rhyme or reason to like how they're being treated, like they just kind of give up. And like if you feel like you're like the world is against you and you can't control things, that mentality I think can lead to increased panic. That's one thing that I don't like about Doc's demeanor. All right, we done here?
I think we can be.
All right, then. This was a lot of fun. I'm sad this Knicks-Sixers series is over. I really was rooting for a Game 7 on that one. But hopefully we'll get more great series to come here. And next playback will be on Saturday. Only game on Saturday, actually, is Nuggets, Minnesota. Hopefully the highest level of basketball that we've seen so far in these playoffs. We'll talk to y'all then. Oh, wait a minute. We got to do the comments. We haven't done any comments. We got to give out some free we're never once you think you're out, they pull you back in. All right. Let's do a comment. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the comments. I was getting distracted, so I had to not do it. Let's see.
Now that the season is over, how does the Griffin firing and Doc hiring look? Firing Griffin, I still think was a reasonable decision. It seemed like he had lost everything, and I am not the biggest Doc Rivers enthusiast. This was actually a series that was relatively well suited to him because they were shorthanded and trying to make it work. But I still don't think he's the right coach for them long term. So firing, still fine. Hiring, still don't love it.
I've seen enough to say, Dre says that Anthony Edwards is better than Joel Embiid. Edwards is 22 years old and a two-way superstar. Yeah, we'll see how things end for Edwards. That Suns team might have just been so bad that he had it pretty easy. But
the house is not on fire, Nate. The house is not on fire.
With how much of an injury risk there is for Embiid, I do think that I would very seriously consider that. Let's see here. What other questions we got? Adil says the series wasn't high quality basketball. I actually kind of agree with that. I don't like neither of these teams had a ton of versatility. They're always playing a center. The Knicks have one guy who can attack off the dribble, really, and that guy was really good. And they've done a great job of fixing it so he's able to still get free and he's in unbelievable shape and all of that. But I agree, and Joel was just kind of was hobbled out there. I thought some of the coaching adjustments were interesting. They tried a lot of different stuff. It was fascinating. It was high drama. It was two great basketball cities, a lot of interesting players. But I agree. Neither of these teams is anywhere close to a championship level, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. Interesting question, more of a meta thing from RF. How have the two of us adjusted to broadcasting live in so many different places in a way that you can't rely on truncate silence, which is something. And I can speak for myself, and Nate and I have different roles in the broadcast. Is I treat them as two entirely different endeavors. And so for me, it's I talked a lot when Nate and I started doing our live show with the great Jim Barnett, and he talked to me about how we talked about how to pick your spots. As I'm a version of color. Nate and I split it a little bit differently, but I treat my role on the podcast and my role on a broadcast completely differently. I also do talk a lot less in the broadcast than Nate does.
Yeah, for me, I just keep talking. This is probably the worst I've ever done in terms of actually pausing for too long on a live show. But when we're not doing that, it's usually the only reason I'll pause is to like look up a stat or something, right? So I usually the biggest difference I'll make is I'll just go from memory on the stat if I don't have it literally right in front of me. Unfortunately, my memory on those is usually pretty good, but I might just say estimate how much time was left on this play or estimate how many minutes the guy might have played or something to not slow it down by like getting the box score in front of me, something like that. So that's probably the biggest difference. But I don't know, I know when it's live and I just don't pause as much. Maybe I'll have to just word vomit a little bit of filler before I get to my point. Let's finish with this one on B-Dub, and he's going to be my pick for our free year of Dunked On Prime. So email dunkedonprime@gmail.com, and Dan will take care of you pretty quickly. So who on the Pacers could step up and give them a fighting chance against the Knicks?
I think Pascal Siakam is going to be a really swing player in this series. I don't know that it's going to be a great series for him, but if we're talking about guys who can step up, I think he's a guy who's going to need to.
Well, it's going to be really interesting. We've had these two series with all these Raptors connections. Now it'll be OG versus Pascal, who probably went at each other in practice for years and years and years. I assume OG is going to be the guy guarding Pascal, and they're just going to kind of set it and forget it on him. Miles Turner is the guy, like he's going to get open shots, I would imagine, in this series. And then of course Halliburton, right? Like he's the guy who, I mean, if you told me for sure that he was going to be right, I would kind of view this series as almost a toss up. But you can't believe in him at that level right now. It does help, I think, for both these teams, particularly for Halliburton, that this series is not going to start until Monday. But Turner is the one I think where you could see him just spacing out and bombing is going to make things difficult. And it's really hard for them to put a wing on him because then OG has to be the guy who's going to guard Siakam. And there isn't really a great option for the center to guard other than Turner. And are they going to put two on the ball on Tyrese? Like, I think if I'm Rick Carlisle, I'm just going to run pick and roll or pick and pop over and over again with Tyrese. And maybe they just try not to guard Nemhard or Neesmith or something like that. But it's, the Knicks don't have a ton of defensive versatility. And I think the Pacers, with that stretch five element, could stress that out more than maybe the Sixers did. Embiid would shoot it, but and then also there's the transition element too. I mean, I think it's going to be like a very offensive series. Like, because the Pacers have, I don't know what the fuck they're going to do against Brunson, but we'll save that for a more thorough. Who is your pick for who's going to get uh
I like
free?
Singh directing us back to the Doc and Adrian Griffin thing, like just kind of getting that perspective. So I'm good with that.
Okay, so B-Dub and Singh, please email dunkedonprime@gmail.com. Thanks to all you who joined us, and we will talk to y'all on the live stream for Wolves and Nuggets. Till then.